Henrietta Bailey's throat went dry as the rope was fitted around her neck. The crowd of Willow Creek citizens shouting for justice beneath the hot Arizona sun of 1878. She had only taken a single loaf of bread after 3 days without food, but in this unforgiving town, theft was theft, and Sheriff Dolan wasn't known for his mercy. "This slip of a girl ain't worth the rope," someone called from the back of the crowd, and Henrietta's eyes darted toward the voice. A tall man pushed his way through the sea of angry faces, his weathered Stetson pulled low over his eyes. Dust coated his long riding coat, and spurs jingled with each confident step he took toward the wooden platform where she stood trembling. Sheriff Dolan squinted at the newcomer. "This ain't your business, stranger." "It is when you're about to hang my wife," the man declared, reaching the platform and removing his hat to reveal sun-bleached brown hair and the most piercing blue eyes Henrietta had ever seen. The crowd murmured in confusion. Henrietta herself couldn't speak, shock stealing her voice as surely as hunger had driven her to steal that loaf. "Your wife," Sheriff Dolan repeated, his voice thick with skepticism. "This thief." The stranger climbed the 3 steps to the platform in one fluid motion. "Yes, my wife, Henrietta Clark." He cast a pointed glance at her, silently commanding her to play along. "Though I see she's still using her maiden name." Henrietta found her voice at last. "Sweetheart," the man interrupted, reaching out to take her bound hands in his. "I've been searching everywhere for you. When your father's letter said you'd headed west alone after our fight." He shook his head, his expression a convincing blend of relief and admonishment. "You expect us to believe this?" Sheriff Dolan demanded. "Name's Caleb Walker," the man said, turning to face the sheriff. "Got the marriage certificate in my saddlebag, if you'd care to see it. Married this spring in St. Louis before I left for my cattle drive. Promised I'd send for her once I found us a place." He looked back at Henrietta, his gaze softening. Never expected her to follow on her own. The sheriff studied Caleb's face, searching for deception. "And you just happened to ride into town the moment we're about to hang your wife. Heard there was a commotion in town. Folks at the livery stable told me a young woman was being hanged for stealing bread." Caleb's jaw tightened. "If I'd sent money like I promised, she wouldn't have been desperate enough to steal." Henrietta could barely breathe, and not just because of the rope around her neck. Who was this man? Why was he lying to save her? "Take the rope off her," Caleb demanded, his voice dropping dangerously low. No man in this territory would stand for seeing his wife hanged for taking food when she was hungry. Several men in the crowd nodded in reluctant agreement. A woman stealing food was one thing, a husband failing to provide for his wife was another matter entirely. "Fine," Sheriff Dolan finally conceded, gesturing for his deputy to remove the noose. "But I want to see that marriage certificate, and you'll pay for what she stole plus a fine." "Gladly," Caleb answered, not taking his eyes off Henrietta as the noose was lifted away. When her hands were untied, Henrietta nearly collapsed from relief. Caleb caught her arm, steadying her with a grip that was firm but not unkind. "I've got you," he murmured, only for her ears. 20 minutes later, after Caleb had produced a remarkably authentic-looking marriage certificate from his saddlebag and paid the baker twice what the bread was worth, they walked out of the sheriff's office. Henrietta remained silent until they reached Caleb's horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion tied to a hitching post outside the town's only hotel. "Why did you do that?" she finally asked, keeping her voice low. "You don't know me." Caleb checked his saddle straps, not meeting her eyes. Couldn't watch them hang a woman for being hungry. He finally looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Where are you staying?" Henrietta looked down at her worn boots. "Nowhere. I spent my last penny 3 days ago." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "That's what I figured. Look, Miss Bailey." "Henrietta Bailey." "Miss Bailey," he corrected himself. "We've got a problem. This town thinks you're my wife now." Sheriff Dolan doesn't strike me as the forgiving type if he discovers I lied. "So what do we do?" she asked, acutely aware of the townsfolk watching them from storefront windows and sidewalks. "We need to keep up appearances, at least until we can leave town safely." He glanced toward the hotel. "I've taken a room. You'll stay there tonight. I'll sleep in the stable with my horse." "I can't let you. You can and you will," he cut her off. "Unless you'd prefer I tell the sheriff the truth." Henrietta bit her lip. "No." "Then it's settled." He untied his horse. I'll take you to the room, then get us some food. When was the last time you ate? Besides the stolen bread they took from me? 3 days ago. Something flashed in his eyes, anger, perhaps, though not directed at her. Come on, then. You look about ready to fall over. The hotel room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small window overlooking the dusty main street. Henrietta stood awkwardly near the door as Caleb placed his saddlebags on the floor. I'll be back with food, he said. Don't open the door for anyone else. When he returned with a tray laden with stew, bread, and coffee, Henrietta was sitting on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap. She'd removed her threadbare shawl, revealing a once fine blue dress that had seen better days. Thank you, she said quietly as he set the tray on the small table by the window. Eat, he instructed, pulling out the chair for her. She didn't need to be told twice. She ate slowly at first, then with increasing hunger as her stomach remembered what it was like to be fed. Caleb watched her for a moment, then turned to look out the window. What brought you to Willow Creek? He asked. Henrietta swallowed a mouthful of stew before answering. I was heading to Tucson. My uncle lives there, or at least he did 5 years ago. I was hoping he might take me in. And how did you plan to get to Tucson with no money? She flushed. I was working as I went. Laundry, mending, whatever I could find. But no one in this town would hire me. She looked down at her bowl. I didn't mean to steal. I just couldn't think straight anymore. Caleb turned back to face her. Where are you from originally? Philadelphia, she replied. My parents died of fever last winter. Our creditors took everything. He nodded, as if her story confirmed something he'd already guessed. I'm heading south myself, taking a small herd to sell in Nogales. I can leave you in Tucson on the way. Henrietta put down her spoon. Why are you helping me? Like I said, couldn't watch them hang you. He shrugged. Besides, I've been hungry before. Know what it does to a person. But the risk you're taking. If they find out you lied, they won't, he interrupted. We leave at first light tomorrow. I've got a pack horse and supplies. Can you ride? Yes, she said. My father taught me. Good. He moved toward the door. Get some rest. I'll be back at dawn. As promised, Caleb returned just as the first light of day touched the eastern horizon. Henrietta was already awake, having slept fitfully despite her exhaustion. She'd used the wash basin to clean up as best she could and had attempted to smooth the wrinkles from her dress. Here, Caleb said, handing her a small bundle as he entered the room. New shawl. And there's a hat in there too. Sun's brutal out on the trail. Henrietta accepted the bundle, touched by his thoughtfulness. I'll pay you back someday. A half-smile touched his lips. No need. He glanced around the room. Ready? They left town without incident, though Henrietta felt the weight of curious stares as they rode past the general store where she'd stolen the bread just yesterday. Caleb led the way, his posture straight and alert in the saddle. Behind them followed a pack horse loaded with supplies and a small remuda of 4 additional horses. Where are your cattle? Henrietta asked once the town was well behind them. Meeting my trail boss and the herd 20 miles south, Caleb explained. I rode ahead to arrange for supplies. And instead got yourself a wife, she said, immediately regretting her attempt at humor when he glanced sharply at her. A temporary arrangement, he replied, his tone unreadable. They rode in silence for a while, the rhythm of the horses' hooves and the occasional call of a desert bird the only sounds. The landscape was beautiful in its harshness, rocky outcroppings, scattered cacti, and in the distance, mountains that seemed to shimmer in the heat. By midday, the sun was merciless. Caleb called for a rest in the shade of a rocky overhang, where a small spring provided cool water. As they watered the horses, Henrietta studied her companion. In the daylight, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 25 or 26, only a few years older than her 20 years. His face was tanned from the sun, with smile lines around his eyes despite his serious demeanor. How long have you been a cattleman? She asked as they shared a simple meal of jerky and hardtack. 5 years, he answered. Started as a ranch hand in Texas. Saved enough to buy my own small herd last year. And now you're taking them to sell in Mexico? He nodded. Prices are better there right now. This is my first drive as owner. It's impressive, Henrietta said honestly. Building something from nothing. Caleb studied her for a moment. Sounds like that's what you're trying to do too. I suppose so, she agreed. Though I haven't been as successful as you. Yet, he added. When she looked at him questioningly, he elaborated. You haven't been as successful yet. You're still breathing, aren't you? Thanks to your quick-thinking husband. The corner of his mouth twitched upward. Despite everything, Henrietta laughed. Yes, he does seem to have good timing. They reached Caleb's camp by sunset. A small group of men, 5 in total, were tending to a herd of about 100 cattle. The men looked up curiously as Caleb and Henrietta approached. Boys, Caleb called out as they drew near. This is Henrietta. She'll be traveling with us to Tucson. The men exchanged glances, but knew better than to question their boss. An older man with a grizzled beard stepped forward. Madam, he said, tipping his hat. Jim Hartley, trail boss. Welcome to our outfit. Thank you, Henrietta replied, suddenly self-conscious about her appearance after days on the road. Jim gave Caleb a questioning look, which Caleb answered with a barely perceptible shake of his head. The older man nodded in understanding. Got a stew going, Jim said. Should be ready soon. Caleb helped Henrietta dismount. I'll set up your tent, he said quietly. The men won't bother you. True to his word, the cowboys were respectful, if curious. They ate dinner together around the campfire, the men sharing stories of previous cattle drives that had Henrietta alternately laughing and wide-eyed with amazement. Caleb remained mostly quiet, but she noticed how his men looked to him with respect, awaiting his decisions and deferring to his judgment. As the evening wore on, Henrietta found herself growing increasingly aware of Caleb's presence beside her. The firelight softened his features, revealing a gentleness she hadn't noticed before. Occasionally, their eyes would meet across the flames, and something unspoken passed between them. Later, in the small tent Caleb had set up for her, Henrietta lay awake listening to the night sounds, the occasional lowing of cattle, the soft footsteps of the night watch, the distant howl of a coyote. For the first time in months, she felt safe. The journey south was slow but steady. The cattle set the pace, and the terrain grew increasingly challenging as they approached the foothills. Henrietta quickly found her place in the routine of the camp, helping with cooking and mending torn clothing. The men treated her with a mixture of protective chivalry and brotherly teasing that she found comforting after months of being alone. And then there was Caleb. During the day, he was all business, focused on the herd and the trail ahead. But in the evenings, he would often sit beside her after dinner, sometimes talking, sometimes in companionable silence. She learned about his childhood in Missouri, his dreams of building a ranch of his own someday, and the sister back east who wrote him letters filled with neighborhood gossip. In turn, she told him about her life in Philadelphia, her father's work as a university professor, and how she'd learned to play the piano but had never quite mastered the art of making a decent pie crust. My mother would be scandalized, she confessed one evening. She believed a woman's worth was measured by her domestic skills. And what do you believe? Caleb asked. Henrietta considered the question. I believe we're measured by how we face difficulties, by whether we help others when we can. She glanced at him. By whether we're willing to risk ourselves for strangers. His eyes reflected the dancing flames as he looked at her. You would have done the same, I think. I'd like to believe so. On the 5th night, a sudden storm blew in from the mountains. The cattle grew restless, and all hands were needed to prevent a stampede. Henrietta watched from her tent as Caleb organized his men, his voice carrying over the wind as he issued commands. When the rain began to fall in earnest, he appeared at her tent, soaked to the skin. Storm's bad, he shouted over the thunder. Your tent won't hold. Come with me. He led her to a rocky outcropping where the pack horse and supplies had been secured. A small natural cave offered shelter from the worst of the storm. Inside, Caleb quickly built a small fire, its light casting strange shadows on the rock walls. Will the cattle be all right? Henrietta asked, wringing water from her skirt. Jim and the boys know what they're doing, Caleb assured her, though she could see the concern in his eyes. We've weathered worse. They sat side by side, listening to the storm rage outside. Henrietta shivered, her damp clothes clinging uncomfortably to her skin. Without a word, Caleb removed his coat, somehow still dry on the inside, and draped it around her shoulders. His fingers brushed against her neck as he did so, sending an unexpected warmth through her despite the chill. Thank you, she murmured, pulling the coat tighter around herself. Can't have my wife catching pneumonia, he replied, the familiar teasing note in his voice. But something had changed between them. Henrietta could feel it in the air, as electric as the lightning flashing outside their shelter. When she looked up at him, his eyes were intense, searching her face for something she wasn't sure she was ready to give. "Henrietta," he began, his voice low and serious. A shout from outside interrupted whatever he'd been about to say. One of the cowboys appeared at the cave entrance, water streaming from his hat. "Boss, cattle are heading south. Jim says we need to redirect them before they hit the ravine." Caleb was on his feet instantly. "Stay here," he told Henrietta. "I'll be back when I can." She watched him disappear into the storm, fear clutching at her heart. The ravine he'd mentioned was steep and treacherous. She'd seen it earlier that day as they'd skirted its edge. If the cattle went over in their panic. Hours passed with agonizing slowness. Henrietta kept the fire going, straining to hear any sound above the storm that might indicate Caleb's return. When the cave entrance darkened again, she leapt to her feet, relief flooding through her. But it was Jim who entered, his face grim. "Miss Henrietta," he said, removing his hat. "Caleb's been hurt." Her world seemed to tilt. "How badly?" Horse slipped in the mud near the ravine. "He took a bad fall." Henrietta was already gathering her shawl. "Take me to him." Jim led her through the rain to where the men had made a makeshift shelter using canvas from one of the supply wagons. Caleb lay on a bedroll underneath, his face pale in the lantern light. His right leg was splinted with branches, and a bloodied bandage wrapped his forehead. "Told you to stay in the cave," he muttered as she knelt beside him. "When have I ever done what I'm told?" she countered, trying to keep her voice steady as she assessed his injuries. "Where else are you hurt?" "Ribs," he admitted. "And my pride. Lost 3 head of cattle." "But save the rest," Jim interjected. "And yourself, which is the important thing." Henrietta gently brushed Caleb's hair back from his forehead, examining the wound there. "You'll need stitches." "You know how?" Caleb asked. She nodded. "My mother volunteered at a hospital during the war. She taught me." She looked up at Jim. "I'll need needle, thread, whiskey if you have it, and clean water." For the next hour, Henrietta worked methodically, cleaning and stitching the gash on Caleb's forehead while he gritted his teeth against the pain. When she finished, she helped him drink some water, her hand supporting his head. "You should rest," she told him, her voice soft but brooking no argument. "So should you," he replied, his eyes already heavy with exhaustion. "I'll stay with him, madam," Jim offered. "You get some sleep." But Henrietta shook her head. "I'll stay." Through the night, she kept vigil, checking his splint, cooling his forehead with a damp cloth when fever threatened, and simply watching the rise and fall of his chest. Somewhere during those long hours, she admitted to herself what she'd been trying to deny. She was falling in love with this man who had claimed her as his wife to save her life. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a washed clean sky and mud-soaked earth. The cattle were accounted for minus the 3 lost to the ravine, and the camp was busy assessing damage and repacking supplies. Caleb woke as the first light touched the canvas above them. His eyes found Henrietta immediately, concern replacing the momentary confusion. "You didn't sleep," he accused softly. "I dozed," she lied, brushing back a strand of hair that had escaped her braid. He reached up, his fingers catching her hand. "Thank you. You saved my life," she reminded him. "Twice now, counting the storm. And you've saved mine." His grip on her hand tightened. "Henrietta, I need to tell you something." Her heart quickened. "Yes. We're only a day's ride from Tucson." Not what she'd been expecting. "Oh, your uncle," he continued, watching her face carefully. "That's why we're making this journey." "Yes," she said, though the thought of parting from Caleb now felt like a physical pain. He seemed to be wrestling with something. Finally, he asked, "Do you want to find him?" Henrietta hesitated. "He's my only family." "That's not what I asked." She looked down at their joined hands. "I don't know anymore. When I started this journey, I was desperate. Alone. I had nowhere else to go. And now." She met his gaze, summoning her courage. "Now I'm not alone. At least, I don't feel alone." Something changed in Caleb's expression, a softening, a hope. "We can still take you to Tucson," he said. Or, she prompted when he didn't continue. "Or you could come with me to Nogales. And after that." He took a deep breath. "After that, maybe we could see about making this marriage real." Henrietta's breath caught. Caleb, I know it's sudden, he rushed on. I know we've only known each other a short time. But Henrietta, when I saw you standing on that platform with a rope around your neck, something inside me couldn't bear it. And these past days, getting to know you. He squeezed her hand. I've never met anyone like you. Tears pricked at Henrietta's eyes. I thought it was just me, she whispered. I thought I was foolish for feeling this way so quickly. His smile was like the sunrise, gradual but transforming. Then you'll consider it? Being my wife for real? Yes, she said without hesitation. But Caleb, I have nothing to bring to this marriage. No dowry, no skills that would help a rancher's wife. You have yourself, he interrupted. Your courage, your kindness, your determination. That's all I want. His expression grew serious. But I want you to be sure. This life isn't easy. It's not Philadelphia. Henrietta thought of the city she'd left behind, the society that had turned its back on her when her father's debts were revealed. She thought of the endless days of hunger and fear as she'd made her way west. Then she thought of the past week, the camaraderie around the campfire, the vast beauty of the landscape, and most of all, the man before her who looked at her as if she were precious. I've never been more sure of anything, she told him. Philadelphia isn't home anymore. Perhaps it never truly was. 2 days later, they were married properly by a justice of the peace in a small town just north of the Mexican border. Jim and the Cowboys served as witnesses, their usual rough demeanor softened by the occasion. One of them even produced a slightly crushed wildflower for Henrietta's hair. The justice raised an eyebrow when Caleb presented the forged marriage certificate, explaining they wished to renew their vows. Seems to me these vows are plenty fresh, the old man commented, but he performed the ceremony nonetheless. As they exchanged simple rings, Caleb had traded a fine saddle for them in the town's only jewelry shop. Henrietta felt a sense of rightness she hadn't expected. When Caleb kissed her, sealing their vows, the Cowboys let out whoops and hollers that had the justice shaking his head in amused disapproval. That night, in a small room above the town's only restaurant, Henrietta became Caleb's wife in every sense. His touches were gentle, reverent, his whispered words of love making her feel cherished in a way she'd never known. Afterward, lying in his arms, she traced the strong line of his jaw with her fingertips. No regrets, he asked, capturing her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. None, she assured him. Though I do wonder what my life would have been if I hadn't stolen that loaf of bread. You'd probably be safely with your uncle in Tucson, Caleb mused. Henrietta shook her head. I think I'd still be hungry, just in a different way. The cattle drive to Nogales was completed successfully, with Caleb receiving a better price than he'd hoped for. With the profits, they traveled to southern Texas, where Caleb purchased land along a small river. The soil was good, the grazing plentiful, and within a year, they had built a modest but comfortable home and increased their herd significantly. Letters arrived occasionally from Henrietta's uncle, who had indeed been found in Tucson. After the initial shock of learning his niece had married a cattleman, he seemed pleased she had found happiness. He even visited once, bringing books for their growing library and staying long enough to witness the birth of their first child, a daughter they named Sarah after Henrietta's mother. On the 3rd anniversary of the day Caleb had claimed Henrietta as his wife beneath the gallows, they sat on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Their daughter played at their feet, while inside, their infant son slept in his cradle. Do you ever think about that day? Henrietta asked, her head resting on Caleb's shoulder. Every day, he admitted. I thank God I was in that town at that moment. Was it really just chance? That you arrived just as they were about to hang me? Caleb's arm tightened around her. I'd like to think it was something more than chance. Fate, perhaps. Henrietta smiled, thinking of how close she had come to death that day, and how instead she had found love and a new life. I'm inclined to agree. After all, how many women can say they fell in love with their husband after he'd already married them? Caleb laughed, the sound rich and warm in the gathering twilight. Only you, my love. Only you. As darkness fell, they remained on the porch, surrounded by the home and family they had built together, a testament to courage, second chances, and the love that had bloomed from the most desperate of circumstances.